Welcome to my new Top 3 video series, where I will offer my top 3 tips for the selected topic. Today's topic is audits. However, before we get started, I wanted to share a bit about my background for those that don't know me. I've been blessed to have the opportunity to help business owners understand risks and help them protect assets for over 24 years. The goal of this presentation is to provide you with some useful tips that will help your organization bypass audit errors that tend to inflate premiums. As you may know, insurance carriers either employ auditors or hire a third party. Often these auditors are very busy and not familiar with your operations. With this in mind, let's get started with the first tip. Tip number 1 is to collect the necessary documentation. There's several documents to gather, such as payroll records, certificates from some subcontractors. I have an audit checklist that outlines all of the documents needed that I will share with you if you're interested. However, before we move on to tip number 2, I wanted to point out one of the most important items that are often overlooked. And that is to review your current policy prior to your audits, including the worksheets. Understand that insurance companies don't normally share the worksheets unless they're requested. Once you collect the worksheets, it will outline where the allocations were done last year. So you can know if, how each employee is classified and how they've allocated it in the past, just to make sure that it's accurate. Now we'll move on to tip number 2. Tip number 2 is to provide documentation that outlines the duties of each employee. If auditors aren't certain, they'll typically put the classification in the highest rate, which in return costs you additional money. So we want to make sure that they're actually putting the employees in the right classification. There's a big difference between, you can see on the screen that there's a clerical worker versus a road worker. The exposures are very different, thus the rates are very different. It's also very important to mention that you should not be charged for payroll given to workers that were paid but did not work as a result of COVID-19. Be sure to separate this payroll so that you don't get charged on your next audit. Now we'll move on to the last tip, tip number 3. Tip number 3 is accurate remuneration. As you may be aware, payroll is the most common remuneration. However, there are other components that may be considered that can have a significant impact on the audited figures, such as overtime. Is it regular overtime, or did you give this employee double time? It'll make a big difference in the amount that you report to the carrier. For a complete list of the items to include or exclude in your payroll remunerations, please let me know, as I'd be happy to share the audit checklist with you. I hope the top 3 audit tips have helped you and your organization bypass audit errors. Would you like a copy of the audit checklist? Do you have questions, or do you have a topic that you would like to have covered in a future top 3 video series? If so, contact me directly or add to the comments of this post. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much.